let's talk about something that I hope might actually be my long-term legacy to the video game industry, which is completion urgency. What is completion urgency? Completion urgency is the desire of a person to finish something. It is their willingness to bring something to completion, an urgency to bring something to completion. It isn't just urgency, because urgency can apply to lots of different things. If you are running really fast in place, you may have a large amount of urgency, but very little completion urgency. Often you see teams get trapped in this kind of state in the middle of their development, where they are prototyping and trying different ideas over and over and over again, retreading the same ground in an effort to find some sort of magical perfect solution to something. That's urgent. They feel this pressure to do something, but they aren't feeling completion urgency, because what they're not doing is bringing something to done. And that's what completion urgency is really all about, is bringing something to done. Now, why do we care about completion urgency? We care about this because I would argue that a lack of completion urgency on a team in various different places is the primary cause, the root cause, the fundamental origin of a lot of crunch. Because a team that isn't feeling a lot of completion urgency in the right places isn't working to finish things. And that lack of completion builds up until the team is getting behind. I would argue that in most cases, the problem isn't a lack of completion urgency on the individual contributor level, on the individual dev. It's often a lack of completion urgency up in the structure of the team. Completion urgency is usually actually built bottom up, because the team is starting to decide one by one that they want to finish this game, and they start finishing each things more, and then that builds upon itself into the entire project having higher completion urgency. But it's eroded top down. It doesn't matter how much completion urgency the individual people making content have. If the leadership has no completion urgency, they're injecting change back into the process. They're not allowing things to complete because they're not feeling that completion urgency. This is fundamental, that while it can and should be built bottom up in most cases, it cannot be undercut and eroded from the top, because it's very easy for leadership to erode completion urgency. So if you're a leader and you're trying to generate completion urgency, a big part of that is to make there be fertile ground for that completion urgency to form on its own. You saying time to be done can only get you so far if there are other voices within the team that aren't feeling that. So it's important that you set that example, absolutely, but you also need to allow time for the team to come around to that and to start to drive it on their own. As those pockets form in different places, then they can start to infect the team as a whole and allow completion urgency to bubble up from the bottom. You set the tone, you can easily prevent it from happening. But to cause it to happen, you have to give it permission to exist and then allow it to start to happen to some degree on its own. There are processes that help. There are ways to artificially create completion urgency temporarily, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. There can be attempts, and I'm certainly guilty of this, of trying to build completion urgency through process. We're going to have tighter schedules. We're going to have different processes we put in place to try to drive completion urgency. And certainly different processes can help or hinder that creation. But ultimately, completion urgency comes from people, not from processes. It comes from individuals deciding that they are going to focus and help the people around them focus on bringing things to done. It ultimately doesn't really matter what your process says, because if you feel like you've got a little bit more time to monkey around, then you're going to take that time, regardless of what the schedule says. So it is something that has to be built by people. While process can help, it's not going to get you there on its own. How do we build completion urgency? This is something that I've been working on for much of my career, and unfortunately, there isn't a really great silver bullet solution, much as I may wish there was. So let's talk about some things that do work and the consequences of some of them. I've talked about this in the crunch video, but crunch does actually generate completion urgency. What I would argue is the only thing that crunch does that helps a game ship is generate completion urgency. It doesn't make people faster, but what it does do is it signals very strongly that it's time to start finishing things, and to some degree, as this sort of awful psychological side effect, it makes people too tired to argue for continuing to churn. None of us believe that crunch is a good thing, so this is, while a true source of completion urgency, and often the fallback, all else fails source of completion urgency, not a great source long term for this industry. If this industry is going to survive, it needs to figure out how to grow out of needing crunch as its only source of completion urgency. Demos are also a good source of completion urgency because you've got some sort of date. This executive is coming on this day, or E3 is this day in June. And if we don't get this demo together, the game is not going to be shown, or it's going to be shown not in its best light. Demos do work, and they definitely put a laser and focus the team and provide a lot of completion urgency on the team. And they're actually really good at getting the leadership on board as well, because they're the ones probably standing in front of 3,000 people showing off this game. So if your biggest problem is a lack of completion urgency within your leadership, demos can actually be really good at fixing that problem temporarily, because it really brings the leaders on board as well. The problem with demos is they're not really sustainable as a source of completion urgency. You definitely have some dates in the year, the Game Awards, E3, maybe some executive visits that you can use to anchor demos on. But if you start trying to artificially generate completion urgency through made up demos, the team figures it out pretty fast. And again, the leaders know this is fake, and they're going to be your source of erosion. Even if you tell that junior level designer that this is really important, Bill is going to come and play it, and his opinion really matters, if the leaders know that Bill doesn't really matter, then erosion will happen from the top. That's probably why completion urgency erosion can so often happen from the top, is because those are the people that more often know what's actually going on. And as a result, artificial sources of completion urgency don't usually work. The other problem with demos is that arguably they aren't actually a source of completion urgency at all. They are instead the source of something that's like showable urgency. There isn't necessarily urgency to get things to done, but rather an urgency to get things to showable, to demonstrable, to be in a state where they can be on stage at E3. If you're not careful, that can easily turn into hacks and shortcuts and unsustainable workflows, especially if you try to do this for a long period of time, because the team gets into this stance, this pattern of building for the next thing to show. So if you're going to run for a long time trying to hop from demo to demo, you need to try to keep the team on the mindset of, yes, it's very important that we be showable for this demo, but we have to try to do it in as real of a way as possible. Use this to answer real questions. Use this to build real systems. But the temptation is to set aside the completion urgency and pick up the showable urgency and generate a lot of fake work that ends up getting thrown away. And that's when demos go from something that can actually be useful to move your project forward into something that are incredibly destructive and cause you to do a lot of throwaway work over and over again. There are some processes that I found that can cause a psychological shift in the team and cause a certain degree of completion urgency. So I'll go through 3 of those. I've talked about the hourglass or pile of sand as a methodology. And what that is that you are focusing as much of the attention of the team as possible on a single point, and then using that focus to drive all development around that single point. It is a very good source of completion urgency on the people in that tip, because you're looking at their stuff all the time, every day, and they really feel the urgency to get their stuff done, not only from the top, but also because all of these other teams that are pushing from the bottom are also driving them to get their stuff done. It is a very good source of completion urgency, but it's actually kind of narrow, because what happens is those people, if you're looking at this mission, they really feel it. The people nearby, they feel it somewhat, but it declines and degrades as you get to the outer edges. And then you can start to have a dangerous lack of completion urgency around the edges of this focus. Another issue of the Hourglass of Pile of Sand is that arguably it actually generates too much completion urgency right there at the tip where everything is focused, because not only is all of the scrutiny on that one piece of content, that one level, that one element of the game from above, it's also being pushed up from below. So the group that ends up serving as the tip of your spear, as the focus of your attention, can actually become burned out pretty quickly. If you're going to use something as focused as Pile of Sand or Hourglass, be careful, because it can cause a very strong disconnect between part of your team who are feeling massively stressed to get things done and other parts of the team who are not feeling that at all. Similar but a little bit less focus is some form of dailies. So if you're not going to do Hourglass or Pile of Sand, just doing frequent playthroughs where people's content is being looked at by another group does provide a certain amount of completion urgency. I don't want my stuff to look like crap, so I am going to try to get it done enough to at least look good in front of the other people whose opinion matters to me. The danger here is showable urgency, which is that they might get things looking real enough to pass muster for a daily or for a demo, but not actually be making it actually real, actually shippable. So if you're doing dailies, if you're doing Hourglass as well, it's important to try to enforce some sort of reality around the work that's being done. Because if you don't, then there's a danger that it turns into a Potemkin village of artificial fake features just good enough to make it through a daily. One of the things with demos, with the Hourglass, with dailies, is that they look at the game more holistically. There can be a temptation to try to generate completion urgency by forcing individual pieces of content or missions through different review gates. The problem with that is it can very easily turn into something where rather than generating completion urgency, you're generating more of like a gate urgency, where the urgency becomes about passing a specific gate, about unblocking a downstream team, about checking checkboxes, rather than actually getting things holistically to done. The goal of completion urgency isn't passing a phase. It isn't getting more done even. It's about getting done. So if you overemphasize measurement on completion urgency, it can start to become corrupted by the process itself. And it becomes more about make bar go up, make number increase, as opposed to getting things done, setting things down, and moving on. It doesn't have to happen, but that is the potentially dangerous side effect of a very process-driven development, is that it can become corrupted into something more focused on the process than it is on being done. I'm a huge believer in triage. I think that what triage does is it gives leadership a consistent communication tool to the team members, and by reprioritizing and moving bugs around, you are saying time to be done, time to do these things. Really heavy triage is a great source of completion urgency, but it only really works if the team has largely moved into bugs. If you are mixing bugs and tasks, unless you are really rigorous in your prioritization and blending those two things together, then what's going to happen is tasks are going to basically win over bugs, and you drain completion urgency out of the system. Once you're fully into bugs, then what happens is that things get popped up to a higher priority, and that action of this is more important, it causes an increase in completion urgency from the team as a whole as they feel a certain amount of momentum building on the team as you're driving towards done. But I don't think it works until you are doing that, until the individual dev can feel things popping up. If tasks just sit as a layer on top of everything, this action, it's silent, it's not heard by the individual devs, and therefore it doesn't generate that completion urgency. So for me, there's a point in your project development where you want to move all of development into bugs. Even if there are tasks left, turn them into bugs, move into the bug list to allow that act of triage to cause the generation of completion urgency. So when I'm talking about these processes, a lot of what that's about is signals. It's about signaling to the average dev that leadership thinks it's time to be done. The other people around me think it's time to be done, so therefore I should think it's time to be done. It's about exposing people's work to other people so that I feel like I am having my content be looked at and compared to other content. So one of the reasons why you can generate completion urgency bottom up is if I'm working on something, but all of the people around me are working on different things, but they're bringing their stuff to a higher level of completion, I don't necessarily want to be the person whose stuff is like half done when everyone else's stuff is starting to look pretty done. So they start to drag me up and increase my level of completion urgency through their own. So when I am trying to find processes to help generate completion urgency, it's really about giving those moments of signaling where you are letting other people's content be seen and showing how done somebody else's content is, but also giving the leaders an opportunity to express their desire and their willingness to abide by a goal of getting things done. Showing a willingness to set aside their pet projects, to set aside their own personal focuses in an effort to finish things is a very strong signal that it's time to start to finish. Completion urgency isn't about getting it done, I don't care what quality it is. It is part of the act of completing things to quality. If you never finish, you're never going to make a great game. Finishing is part of being great. And often you need to finish in order to realize that actually we need to do a little bit more to make this thing that's good, great. It can feel to more junior developers like something like completion urgency and quality are in conflict, but I don't think they are at all. Finishing things allows you to make things better because you don't know what you need to do until you do it in a lot of cases. So by finishing, you gain the ability to see the project as a whole and figure out where extra work is needed. Completion urgency is the term that I coined. I'm sure there is a project management term that applies to this as well, but I'm going to continue using completion urgency because no one has corrected me on that. So maybe this will be my legacy. I would be fine with it if it was, because I do think that at its root, a lot of the sins of the video game industry come from a lack of completion urgency, especially, as I said, within leadership. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you're interested in becoming a member, there is a link to that down in the description. We also have a Patreon now if you're more comfortable with that. We have merchandise. This is the 2DAs Forever shirt, which is a very niche shirt, but if you know, you know, I guess I would say to that. There's a shelf below this video if you're interested in picking something up. What are some things that get you motivated to finish? I am always on a quest for more sources of completion urgency. If there's something that you found that helps you get things done or helps you remember that things need to get done, definitely put that down in the comments. I think we could all benefit from more things on our list. I will see you again soon. Thank you.